Left off in the last video, we were just adding counters to count how many times we rolled a 1, how many times we rolled a 2, a 3, and so on. So I finished up over here. I added 6 different counters. I named one 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, because that kind of describes what's going on in there. It might have even be better if I or 2 count or 3 count, just to imply what's going on. Notice that I had to change the code such that instead of just printing out the random number, I was actually storing it in a location, because we want to evaluate what that random number is. If I want to use it other than just printing it out, I'm going to need to store it in a variable, which I've done here. Notice that I've created this variable rand inside the loop, because it doesn't matter if I get rid of this variable each time through the loop, because I'm going to count it and then I don't need it anymore. So I don't need it the next time I generate a random number. My counters, however, I had to create before I got to the loop, because I need those values to persist. I need the variables to hang around after my loop is over. One other thing that I don't think we mentioned in class, but just to be clear, notice that at line 12 in the for loop header, I'm creating a variable called num, which is going to be the loop control variable. And this is quite handy, except that if I needed that value of num, when this loop ends, what value will be in num? Well, it'll be 101, because 101 is what would cause this Boolean expression to be false. However, because I've declared the variable in the for loop header, the moment the loop is over, that variable is gone. The garbage collector comes along and says, ooh, give me that, and returns the memory to the heap. If you need to keep the loop control variable around after, you can always declare it before you get to the loop like that. Then you still have that value. It'll be 101 after this loop is done, and you can still access that variable. You could also initialize it outside the loop and then just start your for loop header with a semicolon like that. You do need these 2 semicolons in the for loop header to delineate between the initialize, the test, and the update, but it is optional whether or not you initialize it in the for loop header and whether or not you update it in the for loop header. I find that a little bit confusing. I mean, one of the joys of the for loop is that you've got your initialize, your test, and your update all in one place. So I prefer to do that, to initialize it inside the for loop header. So to continue on, we've stored our random number in this variable rand, and then we've got our series of if statements. If rand equals 1, we update our 1 counter, else if rand equals 2, and so on. Note that we use the else here because rand cannot be 1 and 2 at the same time. So if it's already 1, I don't need to check and see if it's 2, because it won't be. So we want to avoid asking questions we already know the answer to. And then finally, down here at the bottom, I output the value of all of those counters. So I'm going to run it so you can see what it looks like. And you can kind of see that about 1/6 of the time it generates the random number. And look at this, it only generated the 6 8 times out of 100, which isn't very many. And the 2s and the 3s are disproportionate. But we could run it again and see if we get the same data, or if that's just some kind of anomaly. Now here, look, it only generated 9 2s as opposed to the 23 last time. So this is more or less random. Remember, as we discussed in class, there's no such thing as a true random number generator. They are all pseudo-random numbers, but this is fun to play with nevertheless. I encourage you to run this in Replit, make some of your own changes, and see if you can generate, see if you can prompt the user for the number of random numbers you want to generate, and see if you can change it that way. Make some other changes and just play around and get comfortable with the code. I hope you found this helpful.